And we are live today. Hello with Ari Marmell. Hello. Welcome. Welcome to the stream. So today we are here talking about Litany of Dreams, which is our newest Arkham Horror. I am Angeli, who most of you will know by now, marketing publicity manager for Aconyte Books. And I'm here talking to Ari, who is our author of Litany of Dreams. Please do introduce yourself. Let people know who you are, Ari.
Okay, well, I'm Ari Marmel. I'm author of Litany of Dreams. We kind of covered that already.
Yes.
I've been writing for about over 2 decades now. I'm the author of about 18 novels, a large number of role-playing game supplements, a bunch of short stories, and also a cat owner, as you can see.
Yay.
And no, I do that mostly in lieu of actually working.
Excellent. Hello, Azura. Hello. Welcome to the stream. Right, so for anyone who is unaware of what Arkham Horror is, could you give a brief sort of, from your point of view, what is Arkham Horror?
So Arkham Horror is it's a Lovecraftian board game with a little more emphasis on. Sorry,
No, it's fine.
All of a sudden.
We're gonna get so many views because there's a cat in it.
There's as much emphasis on sort of pulp action and investigation as much as there is the actual horror of Lovecraft. It's a fairly complex game, but it delves a lot into the people and places of the city of Arkham, which is a major setting in many of Lovecraft's works.
Excellent. And give us a brief overview of the Litany of Dreams, which I'm going to flash up on the screen now because it's quite beautiful. So this is Litany of Dreams. So tell us a little bit about it. Just a teaser of what people can expect from it.
So a few years before the events of the game itself, Litany of Dreams involves the disappearance of a student at Miskatonic University. His roommate and friend is searching for him. Doesn't feel the police are doing enough. He is convinced that his friend's disappearance has to do with a research project he was involved with, and also with a strange, almost alien litany that was repeated to him once and is now stuck in his head almost like a virus. At the same moment, a member of an Inuit village from Greenland is in Arkham looking for a relic that was stolen from his people. The two of them, along with Daisy Walker, the librarian at Miskatonic, find themselves involved in what at first simply seems to be a missing person investigation and very quickly spirals into something a great deal bigger.
Sounds good. I'm intrigued. It does sound very, very good. And I will come back to some of those things that you mentioned, just sort of to try and get some bigger sort of insight into bits and pieces of it.
All right.
I like the idea that there's this like evil earworm that you can't get out of your head. It's like Baby Shark, but more sinister.
Well, I don't know if it's more sinister.
Is anything as sinister as that? No. Right, so talking about the cover very quickly. This cover is made by John Coulthard, and you can find his fabulous art here. He's done many of our Arkham Horror novels, including Litany of Dreams. He's done The Last Ritual and our new anthology, The Devourer Below. And I really love his Art Deco style. What do you think of this cover?
Oh, I love this cover. I've loved it since I first saw it. It's a perfect encapsulation of the period, of the feel of the book. My first thought when I saw it, it sort of reminded me of Great Gatsby, but cursed.
Yes. Yes.
No, I love the book. It's I mean not the book. It's the book. I love the cover.
The book as well.
Yes,
It's very early for you.
it is. No, I had a brief moment of jealousy with the newest one, the anthology you mentioned. I'm sorry, the name is
Devour Below. Yeah,
which I think is honestly even a bit better cover wise.
That skull in that triangle.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I want that tattooed on me somewhere. It's pretty good. But yes, I loved. I was reading something he was talking about, like he did all this detail into the Miskatonic University on the front, and then obviously I just shrunk right down. He was like, "Well, I lost most of it. I did all this work for like these backgrounds and these things, and it gets shrunk down to a book, and you can't see it all."
It was definitely worth it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's really lovely. So the book is available now in the USA and globally on ebook. So you can get it in all good places where you buy your books or ebooks from. And it's also out in the UK on the June 24th. So yeah, it's going to take a little while to get over to us, thanks to current situations, COVID, Brexit, the rest. But it will be in the UK very soon, fingers crossed. And we should have it out for June 24th. Yay! So let's get on with our interview, shall we? So we've heard a bit about the book, and you've mentioned that it sort of lies a few years before sort of the canon of the game.
Yes.
Correct? Yeah. How much of the game sort of do you actually have? Like, did you have a knowledge of? Did you play the game beforehand, or was it just sort of a passing knowledge? You are aware of it, maybe.
I've played the game not often, but I've played it enough to have a sense of how it works. And I did a great deal of reading of the material, the character books that are available, even the rules, just to get a sense of if there's anything I want to incorporate. So no, I wouldn't call myself an expert on it, but certainly familiar.
Yeah. So where else did you sort of draw your sort of research from in doing this book? If it's not, I mean, obviously you've done some from the game, but where else did you go for your influences in your research?
Part of it was just researching the period. I've done a lot of. I have a series of fiction set in the 30s, which is about 10 years after this one. So I'd already done some research into the general overall period. I did more reading on that. I did what research I could on the and I apologize in advance for my pronunciation here. The Kalalit, the Greenlandic Inuit. I did some research on their culture because I definitely wanted to portray the character Billy Shield. Wanted to portray him respectfully, his culture, his beliefs, and I am very glad that we got a sensitivity reader and fact checker to go back over that, because what research I did still had some gaps in it.
Yeah.
And
I was going to ask about the sensitivity reader as well.
Oh yeah, no, she definitely improved his portrayal in the book just many times over. So there was that research, and of course there was some revisiting of some of Lovecraft.
Yeah.
Because there are elements of that you want to try to capture, be respectful to the source material.
Yeah.
So I mean, no deeply intense research, no weeks long dives, but a decent amount of everything.
Yeah. So the Miskatonic University, which is the nice big building on the front, is pretty iconic within like the Lovecraftian universe as a whole, not just the Arkham Horror game.
Yes.
Was it important that you set the story here? Could it have been in other places, or did you really want to set it in that iconic area.
I feel like it wouldn't have worked as well anywhere else. The nature of the research that Chester, the vanished student, was doing, his relationship with Elliot, his roommate, it all very much spoke to a highly academic and research-intensive setting. The access to the books at the library, which Miskatonic has been established in Lovecraft work for as one of the major sources of that sort of learning. It really I mean, I'm not going to say it couldn't have been elsewhere, but the story and the setting really spoke to one another.
Yeah. Is that also why you included Daisy Walker? So she is a known investigator in the Arkham Horror games and a well-loved investigator. Is that why you chose to include her in it as well?
That was part of it. Part of it is just that of the investigators, I liked her. Not that I didn't like the others, but she kind of spoke to me. And the other issue is that I tend to enjoy writing female protagonists. I'm not sure why that speaks to me particularly, but the characters I created for this book were primarily male characters, and it was beginning to feel a little unbalanced.
Yeah.
So I don't want to imply by any stretch that she was included as a token character, but she definitely fit very well into the space that was available in the book.
Yes. So, moving away from the book for just a moment, you are you're known for your horror stories and your love of horror. How did you sort of get into that genre? Because it's a scary place. Why does it call to you? I don't understand.
I'm actually not entirely certain how I got into horror in the first place. When I was a child and a teenager, I've always been a voracious reader, but I was not into horror at that age. I was almost a pure fantasy reader, some science fiction. I started getting into a few horror movies in high school and college. I think a few friends foisted Evil Dead on me, and it appealed to me. And then around that same time, I was enjoying reading a number of fantasy writers who, excuse me, they tended to work in bits of horrific imagery into the fantasy. Simon Green, for instance, does a lot of that. And I think that's where I first began sort of veering into horror. And I still, I still say I'm probably a fantasy writer and reader more than horror, but that's where my taste for it came from, and I began getting further and further into that. Most of my horror writing has been in the form of short stories. I have a couple of Lovecraftian stories in particular. I have one in Chaosium put out an anthology called Madness on the Orient Express.
Yes, I know that one, yes.
And I have one story in there, and then I have a story that was originally published in Shock Totem and is now in my own collection, which is a Lovecraftian horror on a nuclear submarine.
Oh.
And the title of that one is In Deepest Silence. But Litany of Dreams is my first shot at novel-length Lovecraftian horror.
Good. Yeah, I dabble my feet into terrible horror movies. That's what I've been doing during lockdown, is watching like really, really awful, like made with like £10 horror movies. And I have become a little addicted to those, but only because they're not really scary at all. Like at Christmas I watched Santa Jaws, and that was very exciting. I've watched Larmageddon, Killer Sofa, and they are as terrible as they sound, and I love them. There's one that I watched called House Shark, and it's the best thing. It's a house that's infested with this shark that kills everyone.
Of course it is.
And then someone buys it, is trying to sell it for a profit, but this shark keeps eating everyone. It's the best. I highly recommend it. Anyone who's watching House Shark is amazing. So who knows? Maybe this time next year I'll be like into my horror movies and not scared of them at all. Okay, so Lovecraftian horror, as we were talking about that, is known to be a little outdated, to put it politely, in its views. How did you overcome this within the story, but still keep it feeling like that sort of Lovecraftian eldritch horror that goes on?
So, before any, excuse me, before any of the rest of this book came to mind, in fact, before I even knew I was going to be writing it, I have wanted to write the character who became Billy Shewak in this book. And he came to mind, or an earlier version of him came to mind several years ago. And he was designed to be a Lovecraftian character who fit very well into Lovecraft's mythos and style of horror, while at the same time being a deliberate, rude gesture towards Lovecraft's personal beliefs. My goal with this book was very deliberately to write protagonists that would have either not existed in Lovecraft's writing or would have been antagonists. Several of Lovecraft's stories involve the academic or heroic white American character stealing forgotten lore or unholy artifacts from and I use these words in heavy quotations, the savage primitive worshippers of one of the old gods.
Yeah. And
I deliberately wanted to flip that on its head. The fact that and this is not a real spoiler for the book. This is something you learn in very early chapters. But the fact that Billy is in the United States looking for a relic that was stolen by unscrupulous white explorers from his people was a very deliberate subversion of some of Lovecraft's attitudes. To a lesser extent, Elliot, I'm trying to decide what I can say here without constituting spoilers for the book.
Yeah.
Elliot has elements to his personality that also I think Lovecraft would never have even dreamed of including.
Yes.
Let's put it that way.
Yes.
So no, I am very much a fan of what Lovecraft created. Not so much a fan of the man himself. And this book was really a chance for me to try to create still Lovecraftian fiction. I don't want, I didn't want to get away from what he does. I still wanted to include the sense of the cosmic, perhaps with a bit more, perhaps a bit more visceral than some of his stuff. I think that we get. I think modern readers are open to a bit more visual horror, some elements of gore than his were, but I still wanted the sense of the outside, the inexplicable, a sense of the paranoia.
Yeah.
But coming from a different place than his was.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you answered one of my questions, which was about like putting people who in sort of positions of power that Lovecraft just wouldn't, such as women and people of color, and I think that's really great. I think an amazing thing that like we're able to do now. Like, yeah, turn it on its head, and that's a very nice thing.
Exactly. No, I mean, I think there's a sense amongst a portion of the audience that things, be it Lovecraft or the mythos or any given writer or property, I think there's a sense that they must be either accepted wholesale or rejected wholesale. And I feel like it's quite possible to take the good or the interesting somebody created and make it more accessible, make it more. I hesitate to use the word modern, but let's go with it.
Yeah.
I think that's quite doable. Obviously, it's going to be up to the readers whether I succeeded or not in this particular book, but I think the concept is sound.
Yeah. And this particular book is like our most on the horror sort of scale. Is that scarier end. I get to read all of the reviews from people on NetGalley. Some of them was one, and it was just like the whole thing was 5 stars, where they just said, "This scared the bleep out of me." And that was the whole review. And I was like, okay, we're doing something right there. That's fine.
I'm actually quite gratified to hear that. It's funny. Lottie, she edited the book. We actually went back and forth on a few scenes. There were a couple of scenes that I toned down.
Yeah.
In the second draft. My sense of the horrific may be turned up a notch higher than the bulk of the audience was, but I'm glad that we seem to have hit that sweet spot where people are finding it horrific and scary, but still enjoyable.
Yeah, I definitely, from the reviews, that's the sense that I get from it, is that it's that enjoyable sort of, this scared me, but I didn't want to hide it in the freezer. I wanted to continue being scared, and that is difficult to achieve. I think either it goes too far one way and becomes comic, or it becomes, for a large majority of people, just unreadable because it's too scary. Yeah, and as I do most of my reading at night, I don't want to be scared when I read. But yeah, it's definitely, from the reviews, been the one that people are like, oh, now this is the scary one. It's definitely the one I recommend. Like, when people say, which one should I read? I really like, horror stuff, and which one should I go for? And I say, well, Litany of Dreams is definitely our scariest one, so you should go for that one.
Oh, I will happily accept that slot in the release schedule, the scary one.
Excellent. Okay, who was your favorite character to write? Because you've got sort of 3 quite large personalities. Who was your favorite?
Oh, that's tricky.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to have to say Billy. He there was some trickiness to it because, as I said, there was research and care taken to try to avoid any problematic portrayals, any inaccurate portrayals. But I enjoy the occasionally sarcastic, just a little bit outside perspective that he was involved in writing him.
Yeah. So, what's your favorite thing about writing tie-in fiction?
I find that the creative process, it feels different. There are a lot of authors who dislike being constrained by existing properties, and I certainly wouldn't want to write all my fiction as tie-in. But I find there's a different sense to it. There's the trick to finding a story and characters that work in boundaries that have been laid out for you. It's a different challenge, and it feels, I don't want to say by any stretch better when you succeed, but it's a different kind of it's a different kind of achievement. There's a sense of accomplishment to it that is, again, not better than writing original fiction, but it's different enough that you can't. It's not the same thing that you feel writing the original fiction.
Yeah.
And then also being able to take an existing property and finding ways to either delve deeper into it or expand it that fans say, this feels right, this feels like part of it. There's a sense of accomplishment to it.
Would you like Billy to become an investigator in the game?
There's a larger answer to that than just a yes or no. I would actually, and I can't really get into why without spoilers.
Yeah, of course.
But I would really love almost an entire expansion based on Litany of Dreams. I think it's a different kind of investigation and a different kind of overall threat than the existing old ones.
Yeah.
I think it would make for a fantastic and interesting expansion with some expanded rules. And I think in that expansion, Billy would make for a very interesting investigator. I think in a more general sense, his specific goals and objectives may not lend themselves to him being an investigator in the game as a whole.
Yeah.
Although, I suppose one could find ways to justify it, but it would be a little bit of a square peg in a round hole thing.
Yeah.
But I think in an expansion specifically designed around the book and its events, he would make for a very good character for the game.
That's good to know. One of my like personal pet projects that I want to do is to get our characters and things into the games as just like as a thing that we do. It'd be really cool if, like, with our Arkham stuff, we could get the investigators and we can get expansion packs and things, and that's what I want to work on, getting things like having some of our characters be like NPCs in the RPGs and things like that.
I would love that. In fact, a couple of the book's characters, secondary characters, who aren't even the main characters, I think would be fantastic recurring characters for the game. I can't go into why without spoilers, but Alice Bentley and Hiram Lafayette Moses, I think, would both be really interesting NPCs for the game.
Excellent. Well, I shall keep that in mind when I finally get to do this project that I have been dreaming of doing since I started. That'll be very, very cool. Okay, so last question from me, and then I've got one that's come through from Facebook. What's your what are the challenges of writing time fiction? So we spoke about like things that are the best. How do you overcome said challenges?
I mean, the obvious issues are that, again, the same constraints that I enjoy working with at times can also be somewhat constraining. There's things you can't do. In fact, there's a portion of the book where Daisy sort of steps out of the story for a time, and that was because of the canon of the game. I had originally planned for her to be involved in that section of the book as well, but because it takes place prior to the events of the game, I was told there was a limit to how much of the mythos she could actually interact with.
Right. Yeah.
So in dealing with things like that, you have to be flexible. You have to be prepared to make changes to incorporate it, even if it's not how you would have preferred to write things. Effectively, you have to be able to put your ego aside on those issues. And for a writer, that's a big deal. But it's just part of the job. My advantage is that since I came up working in role-playing games before I began publishing fiction, And since my very first published fiction was tie-in, I've sort of been doing this from the beginning.
Yeah.
It's just part of my experience. But I've known authors who have had a much harder time with it, or even walked away from tie-in because of it. And that's not, doesn't make them lesser writers. It's just not in their, it's not in their style of writing.
Yeah. Okay, question from Facebook then. Describe your ideal Call of Cthulhu RPG game.
So I'm going to reference a different game as an example. Many years ago, I ran a game of Hunter, which is part of the World of Darkness, the Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse, that series.
Yeah.
And the Hunter game was about, oddly enough, human hunters with only mild powers going up against the supernatural. And I ran the game for players who had no familiarity with Hunter. They didn't know how I was going to work their characters in. They didn't know what the plot was going to look like. They didn't know the mechanics. They didn't know what kind of powers they were going to get. And that sense of ignorance, that sense of not knowing any more than their characters actually did, was a huge advantage as far as making them actually feel what their characters felt.
Yeah.
I think my perfect Call of Cthulhu game would be running for players who didn't know either the system or Lovecraft that well.
Yeah.
I would love to run a game for people who were literally discovering the truth of the setting only as their characters did.
Yeah. And
didn't have any of the advanced knowledge.
Yeah, I've played Call of Cthulhu once, and so I don't have like a huge Lovecraftian thing, and I've never played Call of Cthulhu. And we were all told we had to have like a secret, and everyone else, their secret was they were actually part of like this cult of this elder god, and mine was that like I'd embezzled like a couple of £100 from like. I died real quick.
It's a different scale there, yeah.
So I just chose this sort of slightly more mundane, like, I've embezzled some money and I'm on the run. And everyone is like, we're secretly part of the cult that's going to kill you. Oh. Well, that was a good fun game, apart from my murder.
Well,
yeah.
Other than that.
Yeah, other than that, it was good fun. Oh, well, have you got anything else that you want to plug, talk about, anything coming up? Before we go for the day? It doesn't have to be Aconyte related if you've got a book or something coming up.
Nothing coming up in the immediate future. I'm currently working on a fantasy novel that is a tie-in for an upcoming fantasy board game called Bloodstone. Other than that, I think a lot of I'll plug something older. I think a number of readers who liked Litany of Dreams for the historical fiction fantasy aspect would like my Mick Oberon series. The first book of that is Hot Lead, Cold Iron. That's the series I mentioned that it's set in the 30s. It's effectively fae-focused urban fantasy in gangland Chicago.
Ooh.
Okay. The main character is sort of a Sam Spade style private eye who is also a refugee from the Sealy Court.
Oh, okay. That colored me intrigued. What was that?
Hot Lead, Cold Iron.
Hot Lead. Right. Put that in my search engine for afterwards.
And it's not horror, but it's as I said, urban fantasy in gangland Chicago. And I have plenty of other books, and I could plug all of them, but we'd be here for another 45 minutes, so I'll stop with those.
Yes. If you want to know all the other ones, you can go to aconytebooks.com and search for Ari, and we've got his bio there with his links and things, so you can find all of his back catalogue. That's the word I was looking for. It's like Pre-library? Like, that's not what
I mean, I suppose it means the same technically.
But yes, well, thank you very much for coming along and for doing this interview.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it, and it's been lovely to talk to you. Yeah, hopefully we will get to talk again soon. But thank you, people in chat, for watching, and talk to you later. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks.